Hi, and welcome to Crash Course Cryptozoology. Today's video is about validity and how a lack of research can make an invalid claim seem valid. The Dogman is an alleged species reported from all across North America, but seems to be centered within the Great Lakes area. The Dogman is described as either a very large wolf or a very large wolf able to operate on hind legs, going so far as to be called anthropoid in nature. By all means, except transformatively, witnesses are describing werewolf-like creatures. In the past, I spoke with Linda Godfrey, who is an expert on the subject, and by expert I mean that she broke the story way back and has been documenting sightings all her life ever since. But today we're not talking about Linda's work, and we're not talking about the Dogman subject generally too much. Instead, I would like to discuss the allegedly first documented Dogman encounter, which many sources claim took place in 1887 in Wexford County, Michigan. Most descriptions of the event are unfortunately very short, so I'm going to read two descriptions from two fairly reputable sources. The first source is dogmanencounters.com, which is something of a radio show that often has guests and witnesses on to talk about the subject. On their website, Dogman Encounters states, "The first documented Dogman encounter happened in 1887 in Wexford County, Michigan. Two lumberjacks reported seeing a creature they described as having a man's body, but a dog's head." A second description can be found on SasquatchChronicles.com, who occasionally branches out to other cryptid cases, especially Dogman for that matter. The website cites an animation series called Dogman Narratives. Dogman Narratives is a 3D animation series that attempts to recreate sightings along with dramatic narrations of the sightings. Of course, it being animation, it's not exactly a verbal description, but it is fairly detailed. The scene presented to us is that a group of lumbermen working in the woods, again in the year 1887, happened to come upon what they believed was a large wild dog, and began to chase it down, presumably in order to keep the camp safe. At some point, the creature is driven to a point that it feels threatened enough to operate on two hind legs. The men allegedly reported that when the creature stood up, a popping sound could be heard in the legs, and its body became much more man-like.
According to legend, Dogman appears every 10 years that falls on the years ending in 7. The most notable contribution to the Dogman topic was in 1987. A disc jockey in Traverse City, Michigan, wrote the song, The Legend. He wrote it as an April Fool's Day prank, but soon after airing the song on the radio, the station started to receive calls from Michigan residents that stated they had seen this creature for themselves. The first reported Dogman sighting happened in 1887 in Wexford County, Michigan. A group of loggers were working in the area. They were in the Manistee National Forest. Towards the end of the day, two loggers spot what they think is a large wild dog. They chase it down until it attempts to hide near some logs. It was on all fours when they cornered it. When they got a little closer, the creature stood up on its hind legs. The legs made a popping sound as it stood up. They said it had the body of a man, but the head of a dog.
Now, these are two descriptions that attempt to properly document the sighting. However, there is a third description that is very different in nature that I'm going to read right now. 11 lumberjacks near the Garland Swamp found an animal they thought was a dog. In a playful mood, they chased it around till it ran inside a hollow log. A logger named Johnson grabbed him a stick and poked around inside. Then the thing let out an unearthly scream and came out and stood upright. None of those men said very much about whatever happened then. They just packed up their belongings and left that night. Were never heard from again. It was 10 years later in 97 when a farmer near Buckley was found. Slumped over his plow, his heart had stopped. There were dog tracks all around. Some of you who are involved in the Dogman phenomenon, perhaps, will recognize those words as coming from a song by Steve Cook called The Legend. The Legend was released in 1987 at the WTCM-FM radio station in Traverse City, Michigan. Steve Cook is a disc jockey who never really had much interest in the actual Dogman phenomenon. As a matter of fact, Steve claims he was unaware of the Dogman phenomenon at the time of recording. In interviews with Skeptoid.com, Steve Cook notes, "I made it up completely from my own imagination as an April Fool's prank for the radio, and stumbled my way to a legend that goes back all the way to Native American times. I'm tremendously skeptical because I've sort of seen the way folklore becomes built from the creation of this song to what it's turned into. But I do believe people who think they saw something really did see something. I also think the Dogman provides them with an avenue to explain what they couldn't explain for themselves." Now that's quite an interesting perspective. There are two very crucial lines in Cook's interview. The first would be his first line, which is that he made it up completely from his own imagination as an April Fool's prank. None of the reports he talks about in his song are noted by other sources as a real report, aside from the first one. And that brings us to the next point, which is that Steve also notes that folklore becomes built from the creation of his song and turns into something else. And that's a good way of mapping out what happens when validity goes unchecked. Clearly, Steve Cook was not writing about actual encounters. And yet, the oldest encounter that anyone's thought of, which is the one that Steve came up with, is being touted currently as the first ever Dogman encounter. It seems no wonder that a lot of sources are quite vague with their descriptions of the encounter because it seems very likely that it didn't happen. Instead, it seems to be the case that Steve's song was so effective and so profound that people who did not understand exactly the song's nature sort of ran with it, let's say. And thus Steve Cook's song became embedded in Dogman lore forever, not just by its own nature, but by the fact that it became valid to people who were unaware of the joke, quite frankly. And this is a good reason to take everything one reads with a grain of salt, because research is so important to do in situations like this. And it's important to do because one never knows when one might be coming across something that simply isn't true. Hopefully, websites and sources like Dogman Encounters that are touting this is the first sighting of a Dogman will eventually edit the sections talking about it, because this is a subject that many people take very seriously, and it won't help in trying to study this phenomenon if we are to use false reports as a crutch. That being said, until next time.